In the hills of Andalusia, a region in the south of Spain, we meet Santiago, a young shepherd. His life is simple, wandering the hills with his flock. He goes from one town to the next, selling wool. His days passed quietly. He feels the wind in his hair. He reads books to pass the time, and he enjoys the silence of the countryside. Yet behind his calm routine stirred a restlessness, a feeling that he was meant for something beyond the familiar pastures and the faint echo of church bells. His father had wanted him to study to become a priest, but Santiago always wanted to travel the land. Accepting this fate, his father had given him some gold coins. "Buy yourself a flock," he told the boy, "and roam our countryside as a shepherd." Following his usual route, Santiago sleeps inside the ruins of an old church. Through a hole in the roof, a sycamore tree had grown, its roots tangled among the stones. Beneath its branches, Santiago dreamed. It was always the same dream. A child took him by the hand and led him through shifting dunes to the Egyptian pyramids. There, the child said, he would find a hidden treasure. Then Santiago would wake, his heart racing, the dream fading like mist at dawn. He sought answers from a woman who read dreams in the town of Tarifa. Her house smelled of dust and incense, her eyes glimmering like glass. She told him the dream was simple. He must go to the pyramids and find his treasure. She didn't even charge him, but made a deal. If he finds his treasure, he'll give her 1/10. Her words unsettled him. They sounded foolish, yet they lingered, and when he left her house, he noticed something in the air, as though the world itself had leaned closer to listen. That same day, he met a stranger in the marketplace, an old man cloaked in worn fabric. He spoke of destiny, of the world's secret language, of a thing called a personal legend, the path each soul must walk to find its reason for being. He claimed to be an old king named Melchizedek. He warned Santiago that fear and comfort are the only things that keep us from living our true story. The old man's words stirred something deep within Santiago. Not a revelation, but a remembrance, like hearing an old song he'd once known by heart. The man told him that when one truly desires something, the universe conspires to help them achieve it. Then, from his breastplate, he drew 2 small stones, Urim and Thummim, black and white, light and shadow, yes and no. He placed them in the boy's hand and told him they would guide him when the omens seemed unclear. Then he vanished, as quietly as a candle flame going out. That night, Santiago could not sleep. His heart felt heavy with possibility. Beneath the sycamore tree, he stared up at the same stars that had watched over him every night. But now, they seemed different, as if they were watching him back. By dawn, he had made his choice. He sold his flock and set sail for Africa. The crossing was short but filled with unease. When Santiago stepped off the boat in Tangier, the air itself seemed to speak another language. Everything was bright, loud, alive, and utterly foreign. A young man approached him, smiling and kind-faced. He offered to help Santiago buy a camel. Santiago gave him what coins he had left. The man led him through the crowded streets, past the calls of merchants and the scent of spices. Then, nothing. The man disappeared. Santiago had been robbed. The sound of the marketplace became a roar. The foreign words, the heat, the confusion pressed in around him until the world itself seemed to mock him. He sat by a fountain, his pockets empty, his dream suddenly absurd. He wanted to curse the world, to curse himself, to curse the foolish faith that had brought him here. Instead, he reached into his pouch for the small stones the old man had given him, the last link to his past, the only proof that the encounter with the old king had been real. He closed his fist around them and whispered a question into the evening air. "Do I still have the old king's blessing?" He opened his hand. The black stone, Urim, glinted faintly in the dying light. "Yes," he asked again, more carefully. "Will I find my treasure?" He reached into his pouch to draw another stone, but as he did, the stones slipped through a hole in the pouch and fell to the ground. He remembered the old man's words. "Learn to recognize the omens. The world speaks in many languages. The fallen stones were an answer, not a clear yes or no, but something deeper." He realized that some answers must be lived, not asked. He knelt and picked up the fallen stones. The city no longer seemed as hostile. Morning came with the cries of merchants. Hunger gnawed at him. Despair tempts him to return home. But he remembers Melchizedek's words, that every blessing ignored becomes a curse. So instead of giving up, he looks for work. He finds a job with a crystal merchant whose shop was being overlooked. He begins to learn Arabic words from the merchant. He hears the word maktub several times, usually when something unexpected happens and the merchant shrugs and says it quietly. When Santiago suggests building a display to attract customers, the merchant is hesitant but agrees, and when it succeeds, he murmurs, "Maktub." When Santiago proposes serving tea in crystal glasses, the merchant again resists change. But when he sees that the idea brings prosperity, he repeats "Maktub." After almost a year working at the crystal shop, Santiago has earned enough money to buy back a flock of sheep, more than he had when he left Spain. For a while, he actually plans to return home. He thinks of the familiar hills, the comfort of routine. He told the merchant one night that he was thinking of returning to Spain. The shopkeeper told Santiago that he, too, had once had a dream of travel, a dream of Mecca, but he had chosen to stay. "I'm afraid that if my dream is realized, I will have nothing left to dream for," he said. The boy realized then that the greatest danger is not failure, but surrender, the slow death of a heart that stops pursuing its legend. He remembers Melchizedek, the old king. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. So instead of returning to Andalusia, Santiago decides he will use his savings to join a caravan crossing the desert toward Egypt. He urges the shopkeeper to travel to Mecca, but he's unsuccessful. The shopkeeper says the hope of Mecca has sustained him more than its reality ever could. Santiago understands. He realizes the merchant has chosen comfort over change, the safety of dreaming over the risk of living. So Santiago packs his belongings and continues his journey towards the pyramids. When Santiago steps beyond the city's last wall, he feels the world open wide. Camels groaned beneath their loads, the merchants shouted over one another, and the smell of leather and dust filled the air. Santiago stood among them, a single figure in the chaos. He felt both fear and wonder. In front of him stretches an ocean of sand. Behind him, the city already feels like a forgotten dream. He climbs onto the back of a camel. The caravan begins to move. Days in the desert are without measure. Its surface shimmers like glass. Its dunes rise and fall like waves in a sleeping sea. He travels beside an Englishman, a scholar with thin hands and eyes that glitter behind round spectacles. The man's saddlebags are filled with books about alchemy, transformation, and the search for the philosopher's stone. He barely looks at the desert. His gaze is fixed on the pages. The Englishman reads endlessly, muttering to himself about sulfur, mercury, and purification. He tells Santiago that the goal of alchemy is not merely to make gold, but to perfect the soul. At night, the caravan gathers around small fires. The flames flicker like fragile stars in the vast dark. Weeks pass. Santiago spends hours alone, feeling his thoughts dissolve into the rhythm of the world. He starts to feel the presence of something larger, an invisible force that binds everything together. He calls it the soul of the world. The caravan eventually stops at Al-Fayoum, an oasis. The desert opened suddenly into a garden of palm trees and still water. Palm trees rise like columns, and pools of water glint in the sunlight. It is there that Santiago sees her, Fatima. She is drawing water from the well. It was as though he had found something he had been searching for without realizing it. Each morning he returned to the well to see Fatima. Perhaps this is my treasure, he thought. Perhaps this is why I came so far. Fatima tells Santiago that she's been waiting for him her entire life, but insists that he continue on to Egypt to pursue his personal legend. She says, if they are meant to be together, they will meet again. One morning, while watching two hawks circle and collide in the air, Santiago feels a sudden dread. A vision of armies approaching the oasis. He rushes to warn the chieftains. They listened gravely. For in the desert, omens are not dismissed. They believed that the desert speaks through those who can hear it. Days later, when the attack comes, the oasis is ready. The oasis was saved. After the battle, Santiago wandered alone beneath the palms, overwhelmed by the strange weight of what had happened. As he walked, he heard the sound of hooves approaching through the sand. A horseman in black robes reined in sharply before him. "Who dares read the omens of the desert?" he asked. Santiago told him he could read the omens because he can see into the soul of the world. The desert rider stared at Santiago. "What are you doing out here, boy?" Santiago hesitated. The truth rose up in him without thought. He said confidently, "I'm following my personal legend." The horseman's eyes glinted in the moonlight. He said nothing more, only turned his horse and gestured for Santiago to follow. They rode in silence through the dunes until they reached a small tent hidden among the rocks. The tent was sparse, a copper pot, a few leather satchels, a sword laid carefully beside a small pile of books. The air smelled faintly of metal and incense. The man removed his veil. He was the alchemist. He tells Santiago that they will travel together across the desert through the dangers of tribal war toward the pyramids and the treasure that calls to him. But Santiago doesn't want to leave Fatima behind. At such a young age, Santiago has met old kings, sailed the seas, had visions of battles, and has finally found love. He's not ready to give it up, but the alchemist explains it simply. To stay would be to betray his personal legend, that if he remained, the years would pass softly but heavily, and one day he would see in Fatima's eyes the reflection of a man who had turned away from his dream. And that resentment, slow, invisible, inevitable, would kill what they shared. The alchemist's story convinces Santiago, so the next morning he bids farewell to Fatima, who promises to wait for his return. The desert at night was surprisingly luminous, silver under the moon, vast and silent as if holding its breath. Santiago rode beside the alchemist, the two of them moving like shadows between the dunes. They spoke little. The alchemist preferred silence. He said that silence carried more truth than words. "Listen to your heart," he told Santiago as the camels trudged forward. "It knows all things, because it came from the soul of the world." The boy tried to listen, but his heart was restless. It spoke of fear, of Fatima, whom he had left behind at the oasis, of the possibility that the treasure was a mirage. It beat fast when he thought of failure. The alchemist seemed to hear those thoughts. "You must understand," he said, "that fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. And no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams." Santiago nodded. Through these conversations, Santiago learns how to listen to his heart properly. His heart doesn't always influence him in positive ways. He thinks his own heart is betraying him by playing tricks on him, expressing fear, yearning for his love of Fatima. Ultimately, distracting him from completing his personal legend. Santiago must learn to come to terms with his heart. One afternoon, as they approached a narrow valley, horsemen appeared over the dunes, armed, their faces hidden. The alchemist did not resist. He moved with the same calm he always carried. The thieves tore through their saddlebags, scattering their few belongings onto the sand. The alchemist spoke calmly. "We are travelers seeking no war." The leader sneered, searching their belongings. When he saw the alchemist's flask filled with yellow liquid and his stone, his eyes narrowed. The alchemist told them the truth. He was carrying the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone. The tribesmen laughed and let them go, thinking them fools or madmen. When they were out of sight, Santiago looked at the alchemist with awe. "Why did you tell them the truth?" The alchemist simply replies that people seldom believe a person carrying treasures. They travelled on for several days until they came upon a mountain range. Tension hung in the air. The desert was at war. Near twilight, dark figures rose from behind the dunes, armed men on horseback, their blue robes whipping in the wind. Again, the alchemist and Santiago were surrounded. They were brought before the tribal chiefs. The alchemist told the tribesmen that Santiago was an alchemist who could turn himself into the wind. The boy's heart stopped. He tried to protest, but the alchemist's gaze silenced him. To prove his power, the alchemist told the chiefs, he will demonstrate in 3 days' time. Santiago was furious. "You have condemned us to death," he said. "You will die only if you cannot become the wind," replied the alchemist. The boy stared at him, trembling. "I don't know how to do that." "You must learn," the alchemist said. "Life will teach you, as it teaches all who listen. Fear is the only thing preventing you from living out your personal legend." For 3 days, Santiago wandered the camp's edge, his heart pounding, searching the dunes for meaning. He spoke to the desert, but the desert was silent. He prayed to the wind, but the wind only stirred the sand. Finally, as the 3rd day's sun began to fall, he walked to the top of a dune and stood before the watching tribesmen. Santiago placed his hands upon the sand and asked the desert for help. He spoke softly to the desert about his love of Fatima. The desert offered sand, but tells Santiago that he will have to ask the wind for help. As Santiago begs the wind, a breeze begins to blow. The tribesmen gasped. The wind stirred. Santiago asked it to carry him across the world, to let him see all things through its eyes. The wind resisted. It said that men were too different, that they were bound by fear, by earth, by time. But Santiago told the wind that he too desired freedom, that his soul wished to move across the world, touching everything like the wind itself. Convinced, the wind grew stronger. Shaded by the sandstorm, Santiago is able to speak to the sun. The sun listened to Santiago's words. It said that it understood love, that it warmed the earth because it loved creation. But Santiago told the sun that it did not yet understand. He said that love is not to remain as you are, but to transform, to become something more than yourself. That even the sun must change, as all things must, when they reach their purpose. The sun shone brighter in reply, and the wind rose to block its light, forming a storm that roared across the camp. Santiago reached beyond the storm. He felt the pulse of creation, the hand that wrote all. He did not speak. He began to pray, connecting to the soul of God. He felt the wind flow through him until he no longer knew where his body ended, and the desert began. The dunes shifted, the sand rose like smoke, spiraling around him until the boy was gone. The desert, the wind, the sun, the soul of God, all were one. When the storm finally passed, the men looked toward the place where Santiago had stood. He was gone. Then someone pointed, and they saw him far away, standing in the sand, his cloak still fluttering in the dying wind. The men fell to their knees, terrified. Santiago and the alchemist rode away as the sun rose over the dunes. Santiago felt as if his soul had become light, translucent. He understood at last that the language of the world was not spoken in words or omens, but in connection, the pulse that runs through everything alive. They rode through the night, and by morning they reached the edge of a monastery. There the alchemist dismounted. He handed Santiago a small piece of gold, formed by his own hands from the fire of transformation. Your heart is where your treasure is, and your treasure is where your heart is. Santiago nodded and continued his journey alone. As the full moon rose over the dunes like a gold coin, the pyramids revealed themselves on the horizon. He fell to his knees and wept. His tears sank into the sand, and a scarab beetle appeared where his tears fell. An omen, he thought. He began to dig. Hour after hour, his hands tore at the earth, his hope flaring with every handful of sand. But there was nothing, only more sand, dry and endless. After everything that had happened, this was the reward. Santiago had left his life behind in search of his personal legend, experienced love and had to abandon it, suffered wars and had become one with the soul of God. And yet, here he was, finally at the pyramids. There was nothing. Just a hole in the ground. 3 men approached, thieves, their faces hidden by cloth. They stole what little gold Santiago had with him, and they made him keep digging all night, expecting to find more. When Santiago could only find sand, the thieves beat him, almost killing him. They demanded to know what he was doing there in the first place. Santiago told them of his dream, the treasure by the pyramids, the long journey, the omens. Like the alchemist before him, Santiago tells the truth to his assailants. The men laughed, thinking him insane. "You fool," one of them said, spitting into the dust. "I dreamed once, too, dreamed of treasure buried in Spain, under a tree that grows in the ruins of an old church, but I'm not stupid enough to cross a desert for it." Santiago began to laugh. He understood now. The real treasure was the journey. The journey was the real treasure. He had returned to Spain. The land was exactly as he remembered, the hills golden, the air heavy with the scent of olive trees. He walked to the old church where the sycamore grew through the roof. The sheep were gone now. The place was quiet except for the rustle of leaves. Santiago knelt at the roots of the tree and began to dig. And there, where his journey had begun, he found a chest. Inside were gold coins, jewels and relics. He touched them, but he felt no greed, no astonishment, only peace. He had already found his real treasure long before uncovering this one. He lay back beneath the sycamore tree, the same one that had shaded his dreams. He closed his eyes and felt the wind brush against his face. It smelled faintly of sand and distant palm trees. He smiled. He knew that somewhere in the desert Fatima was looking at the same stars. The wind would carry his kiss to her. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed our telling of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. Tell me in the comments if you want me to cover your favourite story.